Hey guys, it's Thanimal, and today's a very special video. Behind me is a Phantom. This is an F4, it's made by McDonnell Douglas, and we are here at Hill Aerospace Museum. This is the second largest aerospace museum in the country. We're gonna have so much fun. We're gonna take you inside. There's so many cool aircrafts to show you, and just not enough time, so let's go! All right, so behind me now is the F-15 Eagle. Now this thing was made by McDonnell Douglas. This is the same company that made the F4 Phantom, and this is just a phenomenal piece of aviation. They're actually still used a little bit in the Air Force. They are an air superiority fighter, and these are quite remarkable. They have never actually been shot down in air-to-air combat, I believe, and they've actually scored 100 kills. The radar on these things are amazing. The radar locks that they get from their missiles is incredible. In fact, oftentimes just the sound of the radar lock in the cockpit is enough to scare people away. These are very, very vicious, incredibly maneuverable. They have a twin boom design, two massive engines. They're closed off for right now, but you can actually see these lines in here because this would actually adjust the influx of air depending on what the engine needed. If the engine needed more air or less air, you can see in the tip there's a gun port where they probably use some sort of multi-barrel Vulcan gun. Again, the guns are back on these aircraft. You can actually see the mechanics of the gun here. This is just really, really cool, and some of these are just fake rounds in here. And this is the drum well where it all comes from. Really, really fascinating. And then, here are the barrels. This is actually the M61 Vulcan cannon. This is the same cannon that we found on the F-104. We can see it right there. It's a very, very beastly gun there. We also have over here, we have a wind-corrected munitions dispenser. I honestly do not know what that is. But we have a couple of bombs here. This aircraft, as most aircrafts are nowadays, are designed to be incredibly flexible and do a variety of missions depending on what is needed. This looks to be a sensor fused weapon. It looks like to be some sort of cluster bomb. Alright, so that's just fantastic. Looks like they're still constructing stuff over there, but you can also see back behind there's another missile that this thing could carry. Mainly it carried anti-aircraft missiles. You can see down along there. Interesting thing about the production of this aircraft, this was actually built in response to the MiG-25 that was made in Russia, and that was actually made in response to some of the fast and high-flying bombers that we made. So they basically just made a large interceptor. They made it out of aluminum because they didn't have the money to make something really, really nice like titanium. And essentially what they did was they made the fastest aircraft they could to keep up with these bombers that they were trying to hunt down. And so the Americans see footage of this new aircraft, and they hear the claims of that it can go supersonic, that it can go, faster than twice the speed of sound, all that cool stuff. And they're like, we need to make something. And they start thinking, the only way they could do that is if they made it out of a really complex material. And so that's what America did, is that they made this amazing aircraft out of really proper materials, and made it exactly what they thought the MiG-25 was. They were kind of surprised when they finally saw the MiG-25, and it turned out it was actually just made out of aluminum, and it was kind of fragile when it went that fast, and it can only go that fast for very short periods of time. Nonetheless, the MiG-25 is not around today, but this aircraft is definitely around today, and it's still being used. However, it is getting kind of old on the tooth, and it should be phased out if they start making some more current aircraft. Hey guys, so we're here with another aircraft that I absolutely love, but the government didn't really love too much. This is the Northrop F-5 Tiger II. This was designed to be a very budget-friendly interceptor, and it fulfilled exactly what it wanted to do. Northrop has developed a lot of very cheap and inexpensive, I don't want to say cheap, they were just very small and very low-maintenance aircraft, and the Tiger was not no exception to that rule. It had a couple guns mounted in the front. It had a couple guns mounted in the front, and then it had capability for a couple of anti-aircraft missiles. and it was just meant to be very light, very robust, very easy to maintain. Unfortunately, the United States Air Force didn't really bite too much. However, because they wanted it to do more, they wanted to be able to carry certain things and such. What ended up happening with the F-5 is that they ended up trying to sell it to other countries and our allies who didn't have a lot of money. So we couldn't sell them our lead designs, but we could definitely sell them these guys. And some of the great features of this aircraft were its response time was great, and it was just really easy to maintain. Any munchkin could actually maintenance this thing and repair it, and it was just really a budget-friendly version. Doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but if you just need jet aircraft, this is what you want. Alright people, right here is one of my favorite aircrafts, literally of all time. This is the not-so-beautiful A-10 Warthog. Now, it was actually supposed to be called the Thunderbolt II, but nobody calls it that. Everybody calls it the Warthog. This is made by Fairchild Republic, and this is a, from start to finish, designed and implemented ground support aircraft. And it did a phenomenal job. In fact, it's still in service today, but a lot of people are trying to get rid of it. It's not glamorous, but it does the trick. It is a subsonic fighter, so it can't go faster than the speed of sound, which most fighters can. But it is phenomenal at doing what it does. It is a ground support aircraft, which means that ground troops will call in the A-10s to blow up tanks, to provide some great fire support, to drop bombs exactly where they need them, instead of just in the general area. So you can definitely see that with the bubble canopy. It is very maneuverable. You see the tail boom in the back. There's another one on the other side. It is very maneuverable, albeit not as fast as everyone else. This thing has an amazing capacity, tons of pylons that can hold a ton of different munitions, guided and otherwise. But the main weapon on this system is the GAU-8 Avenger. The GAU-8 Avenger is a 7-barreled Gatling gun. You can see one there and another one here. It fires 30mm rounds at 4,200 rounds a minute. It's about 200 rounds for a second. Not a second. For a trigger pull, they usually do for a couple of seconds, and it's usually about 200 rounds downrange. This thing is accurate 80% at 5 miles. This thing is designed to blow up tanks. In fact, it was basically designed around the gun. And the gun was designed to destroy Russian tanks. During the Cold War, there was a lot of tanks being produced by Russia. We had no idea what was going on. So we decided to make this tank and make this tank buster of an aircraft. This is exactly what it's designed to do, is just blow up tanks, and it still does it to this day. Unfortunately, like I've said before, that they're kind of thinking about getting rid of the thing. They've thought about it several times because it doesn't go very quick, but it is very nimble, very maneuverable, and that gun is phenomenal. Also, another thing about this is that they actually designed this, again, for a ground support role. So underneath the cockpit, it is encased in basically a bathtub of titanium, and that's to protect the single pilot that flies this thing. Again, from start to finish, they designed this thing to be ground support. That's exactly what it does, and it does a phenomenal job with it. We can actually see it looks to be bits of the wind tunnel model, which is really phenomenal. Another thing that's great about this aircraft is that it is designed to be incredibly robust. Even if this thing has half its wing gone, one of the engines down, and also one of the tail booms is off, this thing can still land and fly. That's how well this thing was designed, and a lot of the pilots say that I would be dead now if I was not flying this aircraft, because it is so robust and it still flies even while taking multiple hits. Okay, so what we have here is part of the Century series, which I believe we have pretty much all of the Century series here. This is the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. Now, if anybody watches Mystery Science Theater, you know that there's a really bad film called Starfighters, which is basically taking a bunch of government-issued stock footage of this aircraft and trying to build a story around it. Most of it is just them refueling. And so you see this here. This aircraft was, I almost want to say it was a very singular design. They just wanted to make it fast. That's all they wanted to do. You can see how streamlined it is. There's actually, you can't tell from here, but there is an actual covering over that aircraft wing. And the reason why is because those aircraft wings were actually sharp. Like, you could actually cut paper on that thing. And that was the design of this aircraft, to just be a sleek, really, really thin wings, and just boom, it was meant to be very, very quick. However, this was just a stepping stone in learning that speed is not everything. Those things really didn't stand well to turning, so this thing could not turn very well because of those wings were so thin and very, very flimsy. This thing had looks like a gun on the side. I don't know if it's a Gatling gun. It looks like some sort of multi-barreled gun because there is not another gun port on the other side. So this thing was just meant to be an insanely fast interceptor. And it looks like, actually, from reading this little pamphlet here, or this little, on this easel here, it says that it was armed with the M61 20mm Vulcan cannon. So just as I suspected. Again, wasn't really terribly successful, but it really actually helped the aircraft learn, the Air Force really learn what they needed in interceptors. So what we have here is the F-105 Thunder Chief. Now this was mainly used in Vietnam. It was originally designed to be a multi-role bomber, sort of a light bomber. It was very fast, it was very, very large, as you can see. It had two people to operate it. We have a pilot, and it's not really a co-pilot. He mainly took care of munitions and bombs and situational awareness and such. But this thing could hold one massive amount of bombs. However, it wasn't really used too much as a bomber in the Vietnam conflicts. It was mainly used as almost an interceptor, and because of that, it actually didn't do all that well because it wasn't designed that way. It looks like we're still using the M61 Vulcan cannon on the side there. We actually have the refueling probe out. This was used by the Air Force. But we can see the massive amount of pylons that are on the side of this aircraft. This could hold one heck of a lot of things. An interesting thing to note out here with this missile, we have this probe, this cord that gets stuck in, and that actually carries the signal for it to launch. But this thing was a great little airplane. Hearing from a lot of pilots, they had a tendency to really love this aircraft because it brought them home when most other aircraft wouldn't. It's supposed to be a very, very robust design. We have almost early thrust vectoring here, although it's not really thrust vectoring as it is just concentrating a lot of the force. You can see this commonly in the back of aircraft such as the F-16. Those have a lot of nozzles that really choke in on it, but this one is just four little, probably hydraulically controlled flaps in the back. But a very, very large aircraft. Unfortunately, most of its service, it wasn't actually doing what it was designed to do, so it wasn't as successful as some other aircraft. So this is the F-111 Aardvark. This is a very fast, supersonic fighter bomber. Main reason it's that it's a fighter bomber is because it's very quick. It can do intercept missions, but it was designed to be a bomber. The B-1 actually uses about the same systems as this does. It's meant to be very, very quick, but also it had a terrain following feature where you could select 2,000 feet, and it would, the radar dome in this black portion would actually scan in front of you, read the terrain, and move your aircraft so it's always at 2,000 feet. So you can do this for low-level bombing. If you're so low that the radar can't detect you, you're basically stealthy. So it's just moving right along. And actually, I believe the Australian Air Force still uses the F-111 Aardvark, even though they're really looking to upgrade. You can see here the side panels open. You can see all the computer systems that they needed just to make this thing actually do what it did. Obviously now the avionics packages, they're not as complex, but you can see all these things. Another thing I find is very fascinating, the bottom gray bit here, it actually has a weight on there. That little module is 43 pounds. You can imagine how much weight is in the nose of this thing just based on all these computers. But it did the trick. It's a great aircraft, and I'm really happy to actually be able to see one. So this is the OV-10A Bronco. This is a very tiny, itty-bitty aircraft that's meant to be insanely versatile and very maneuverable. It's interesting because a lot of this plaque says that it's very used for reconnaissance and artillery spotting and all these things, but you see the amount of rocket pods it has. It has a gun pod on it as well. I mean, this thing was very, very heavily armed for just a reconnaissance fighter, but it's incredibly maneuverable. You can almost, if you can look at the cockpit, the bubble canopy actually goes out, meaning that you can look almost directly under the nose of this aircraft. very well designed for high visibility, and a really nice designed aircraft. It doesn't get a lot of the glamour because it doesn't blow things up as much as other aircraft do. But it is really fascinating how often this aircraft was used, just to get a better picture of what their surroundings. I believe most of this was used during Vietnam, because there's a ton of woods and hills everywhere. This is a great little aircraft, really easy to operate because it's a propeller-driven aircraft. But yeah, really cool how such a small aircraft can have so many rockets and guns. Alright, so if you know anything about military airplanes, you know what this is. This is the SR-71 Blackbird. This is the Strategic Reconnaissance, which is why the SR comes into play. Strategic Reconnaissance aircraft. This aircraft is no longer in use, unfortunately, because it's not practical enough. It's very inefficient. Well, not necessarily inefficient. It does a lot of things, but it's just really expensive to run. This thing, the top speed of this aircraft is completely classified. However, there has been one pilot that has said it is a wonderful feeling when you are going Mach 4 and you still have plenty of gas you can add to it. So, yeah, that's just ridiculous. So, the interesting thing about this thing is about this engine is that it is incredibly versatile. It's really difficult to explain exactly how, and you can actually go online and you can find people trying to explain this engine. But to put a long story short, if you see all over this, there are these fins and little air intakes and outtakes and stuff. And essentially what this does is that it perfectly optimizes the amount of air that you need to make the engine go as fast as possible. Another interesting fact, one thing I can say as well, is that this nose cone is very important. If you notice, the nose cone isn't straight with the aircraft, it's kind of tilted down. The reason being is that they wanted this nose cone to create a shockwave. It's going so fast, it actually creates a shockwave, and the shockwave is designed to actually go into that right into there, and it'll actually help the engine move and go. It actually rides the shockwave, essentially. In fact, when they're at their cruising speed of around like Mach 2, about 75% of the aircraft's thrust is created just by the shockwave of that tip, as opposed to the engines. The engines just kind of keep it cycling. But we're actually going to go to a couple different parts of this. They actually have a ton of little exhibits that we're going to check out. So let's check those out now. So here is the AG-30 start cart. Now this is basically a massive engine to start these engines going. Now the fascinating thing about these engines is that if you make an engine that can operate on sea level without going any speed at all, it's not going to perform when it's going Mach 4. And so if you make an engine like this that performs great at Mach 3, it's not going to perform well when it's just sitting on the ground. So they had to create a ton of subsystems to make this thing run, and one of those things was this start cart to actually start the engine. Now, a fascinating thing, these engines burn so hot that they need a special fuel not only to run these engines, but to even start them. They actually designed a special kind of fuel just to start the engines. And this is also the start cart that actually had that as well. And so we're going to move along and look at as many aspects of this aircraft as we are allowed to see. Sorry, so here's a very short list of some of the records that it has held. You can see New York to London in 1 hour and 54 minutes and 56.4 seconds. Average speed of 1,806 miles per hour. Also a world speed record of 2,193.167 miles per hour. An absolute altitude record of 85,000 feet. And an East Coast to West Coast record, Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., 1 hour, 4 minutes, 19.8 seconds, average speed of 2,144 miles an hour. Now, keep in mind that, yes, it was going that fast, but it probably could have gone faster. So, and again, they didn't want to unveil, and it is still classified how fast the actual aircraft could go. And if you talk to pilots that flew the thing, they still won't tell you. And I just really hope to someday know exactly how fast it could go. But, you know, only time will tell. So here we actually have the engine of the SR-71 Blackbird. This is the, the J85, made by Pratt & Whitney. This is a turbojet engine. And you can see, again, not only do they have these vents in and out, but you can see these pipes can also bypass certain parts of the engine, because certain parts were used for the over 2,000 miles an hour and some for less. It did explain that the engine, when it's cruising, actually uses what's called a ramjet, which is what I was explaining earlier. It has that shockwave, and all that concentrated air from the shockwave go into the engine, and all it does is just inject a little fuel, and the pressure of that shockwave is so high that it'll instantly combust the fuel and give it some more lift, or not lift, but more power. And so when it's really high up in the sky and it's just going way fast, it's barely using its engine at all. It's just using the ramjet, which is just no moving parts. It's just exploding air and exploding fuel. But this thing was a masterwork of engineering. Not only can it go Mach 3 for extended periods of time, but it also can work as a turbofan. It's an incredibly versatile engine, but unfortunately it's just kind of a little too complex and a little too spendy to run for it to be run currently. They actually still run the U-2s, I believe, for reconnaissance, and they don't use these things because they're just so expensive. But we have another shot of this gorgeously sleek aircraft, and it's just, it almost brings a tear to my eye, I say. So with an aircraft that goes so fast, you can go so high with it. And this is actually the spacesuit that they designed for it. When you're flying an SR-71 Blackbird, you are flying at 80,000 feet above the ground. And that requires you to have this spacesuit, because when you're that high, if any of you cooks out there know, if you're at a different altitude, waters and liquids boil at a certain temperature. If you are at 80,000 feet up there and you don't have a pressurized suit, your sweat literally boils. So you need this to have a pressurized suit to make sure that you're still alive. And it's actually interesting that they actually said that that they actually have technicians that when you get into the aircraft, they help you plug in and everything. And the pilot said it's a huge aspect of trust, because you can't even see these things plugging in, and you have to trust that if they're plugging, that they're plugging everything in. Another thing about this spacesuit, yes, they wore diapers because they had long missions flying across the world. You kind of had to just go. So yeah. A lot of innovations made for this to be able to go that high and that fast. That's another reason why they don't run these anymore. It's just so much fuss to get these people up there, and it's not necessary because we don't have real allies. And the main reason that we don't have a lot of enemies anymore. The main reason they made this to go so fast is that this plane could literally outrun missiles. So they're just like, oh, there's a missile, and you just jet it right off. So that's not really necessary anymore. And again, a lot of this fuss is, you can just completely avoid it by just flying a lesser aircraft. So we're at the back of this phenomenal aircraft, and there's just one more thing I wanted to point out. Again, I've been mentioning a lot how this aircraft is very fickle when it's on the ground, and that's evident in the fuel tanks underneath the aircraft. Now, a lot of people would say that this aircraft would weep when it's on the ground because it wants to be in the sky. What they really mean is that they still don't have the technology of a fuel carrying cell, or a fuel tank that can survive going Mach 3, because there's a tremendous amount of heat. In fact, this aircraft expands by a solid foot when it's at altitude, because it's expanding, because it's so hot, it's expanding the entire aircraft. So they actually designed the fuel tank to have holes in it that when it heat up, it would actually seal up those holes. But they don't have a compound yet that can actually withstand that. So on the ground, those holes would still be open. So they would fuel it up, and it would literally be leaking fuel onto the ground, and until it actually got up to altitude. So usually you would take off with this thing, and immediately you would get to altitude, and usually go with a KC-135, fuel up, and then poof, off you go to 80,000 feet, and that would seal up those fuel tanks. But it's again, all the hoops that they had to jump through to make this thing fly the way it did is just absolutely remarkable. So here we have the fabled MiG-17, not MiG-17, just the MiG-17. I've been doing so many American aircraft. I believe this is the only Russian aircraft that they have in here. The MiG-17 was based off of the MiG-15. They look very similar, but these are very early Russian jets. They just had one engine in the middle, and they oftentimes, depending on the model, they would have guns coming from the center here. You can see one of the gun ports here, and there's a couple tucked away in there. And then this cone in the front, well, not cone, but just the air intake in the front. Very simple design. Interesting, these little flaps on the side of these that are these little ribs, these extended ribs, were actually designed because basically air would kind of fall off the side of the wing and not produce enough lift. The Americans designed to, I forget what it's called, but they actually have, if you come over here, they actually would have the wing, and then they would have a little bit of the wing forward so that the air would go and actually create a vortex that would actually keep the air on top of the wing. But they decided, the Russians decided a simpler option, just put these fins there so the air wouldn't slide off. It's actually funny, the Americans used to say that those fins on there would make it so the air wouldn't slide off and defect to the west. Alright, so they have this way cool encased aircraft engine. This is a propeller engine. There's a ton of different examples of where this is used, but it has this little button here, and you can just go ahead and start it. Now go ahead and look at that. So it actually just kind of moves the engine. It's just so cool to see how much power is in these. You see the pistons. You can even see them. It's just so fascinating. These engines are just absolutely incredible and large. I could watch this all day. Just a running show of some of the aircraft we couldn't get to today. We got a C-130. We got a B-29. A B-58 Hustler. Wow. Those things are rare. A B-52. And then finishing up with a KC-135. Sweet. And we're out of here.